What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40K. So as you know, Halloween is now over, and the scares are not done. I was going to originally put this one as the final episode on Halloween, because it focuses on a different type of scare. One not about like ghosts and demons and tyrannids and getting eaten alive, but one more close to home, one more emotional. The loss of a father, the loss of a parent, the loss of a loved one. So here I have an excerpt from 15 Hours where we see a guardsman having to say goodbye to his family for perhaps the final time. So without further ado, guys, let's dive into this 40K lore. Citizens of Jumel 4, the parchment read, "Rejoice, in accordance with imperial law, and the powers of his, your governor has decreed 2 new regiments of the Imperial Guard to be raised from among his people. Furthermore, he has ordered those conscripted to these new regiments to be assembled with all due haste, so that they may begin their training without delay, and take their place amongst the most holy and righteous armies of the blessed Emperor of all mankind." From there, the parchment went on to list the names of those who had been conscripted, outlining the details of the mustering process and emphasizing the penalties awaiting anyone who failed to report. Larn didn't need to read the rest of it. In the last 2 days, he had read the parchment so many times he knew the words by heart. Yet despite all that, as though unable to stop picking at the scab of a half-healed wound, he continued to read the words written on the parchment. Arvin. He heard his mother's voice behind him, breaking his chain of thought. "You startled me, standing there like that. I didn't hear you come in." Turning, Larn saw his mother standing beside him, a jar of Kuden seeds in her hand, and her eyes red with recently dried tears. "I just got here, Ma," he said, feeling vaguely embarrassed as he put the parchment back where he had found it. "I finished my chores and thought that I should wash my hands before dinner." For a moment, his mother stood there quietly staring at him, facing her in uncomfortable silence. Larn realized how hard it was for her to speak at all. She knew she would be losing him tomorrow. It lent in her every word a deeper meaning, making the most simple of conversations difficult. With every instant, there was a threat of a single ill-chosen word that might release the painful tide of grief welling up inside her. "You took your boots off," she said at last, retreating to the commonplace in search of safety. "Yes, Ma. I left them there in the hallway." "Good," she said. "You'd better clean them tonight, so as to be ready for tomorrow." At that word, his mother paused, her voice on the edge of breaking, her teeth biting her lower lip, and her eyelids closed as though warding off a distant sensation of pain. Then, half turning away, so he could no longer see her eyes, she spoke again. "But anyways, you can do that later," she said. "For now, you'd better go down to the cellar. Your pa's already down there, and he said he wanted to see you when you got back from the fields." Turning further away from him now, she moved over to the stove and lifted the lid off one of the pans to drop a handful of the seeds into it. Ever the dutiful son, Larn turned away, towards the cellar and his father. The cellar steps creaked noisily as Larn made his way down them. Despite the noise at first, his father did not seem to notice his approach. Lost in concentration, he sat bent over his workbench at the far end of the cellar, a whetstone in his hand as he sharpened his tool shears. For a moment, watching his father unawares as he worked, Larn felt almost like a ghost, as though he had passed from his family's world already, and they could no longer see or hear him. Then, finding the thought of it gave him a shiver. He spoke at last and broke the silence. "You wanted to see me, Pa?" Starting at the sound of his voice, his father laid the shears and the whetstone down, before turning to look towards his son and smile. "You startled me, Arv," he said. "Zell's oath, but you can walk quiet when you've mind to. So, did you manage to fix the pump?" "Sorry, Pa," Larn said. "I tried replacing the starter and every other thing I could think of, but none of it worked." "You tried your best, son," his father said, "and that's all that matters." Besides, the machine spirits in that pump are so old and ornery that the damn thing never worked right half the time. Anyway, I'll have to see if I could get a mechanic to come look at it. In the meantime, the rains have been pretty good, so we shouldn't have a problem. But anyway, there was something else I wanted to see you about. Why don't you grab yourself a stool so the two of us men can talk? Pulling an extra stool from beneath the workbench, his father gestured for him to sit down. Then, waiting until he saw his son had made himself comfortable, he began once more. I don't suppose I ever told you too much about your great-grandfather before, did I? I know he was an off-worlder, Pa, Lauren said, and I know his name was Augustus, same as my middle name. True enough, his father replied. It was a tradition on your great-grandfather's world to pass on a family name to the firstborn son in every generation. Of course, he was long dead by the time you were born. Mind you, he died even before I was born, but he was a good man, and so we did it to honor him all the same. A good man should always be honored, they say, no matter how long he's been dead. For a moment, his father's face gave away a thoughtful demeanor. His father fell silent. Then, as though he had made some decision, he raised his face up to look his son in the eye. As I say, your great-grandfather was dead long before I could have known him. Arvi. But when I was 17 and just about to come of age, my father called me down to a cellar and told me the tale of him, just like I'm about to tell you now. You see, my father had decided that before I became a man, it was important that I knew where I came from, and I'm glad he did, 'cause what he told me has just stood me in good stead ever since. Just like I'm hoping that's what I'm going to tell you now, and hopefully you too will be in good stead likewise. Of course, with what's happened the last few days and where you're bound for, I've got extra reasons for telling it to you now. Reasons that, Emperor love him, my own father never had to face. But that's the way of things. Each generation has its own sorrows, and has to make for the best of them that they can. That's all as may be, though. Guess I should just stop dancing around it and come out and say what it is I have to say. Again, as through wrestling inwards for the right words, his father paused. As he waited for him to begin, Lauren found himself suddenly thinking of how old his father looked. Gazing at him, as though for the first time, he became aware of the lines and creases across his father's face, the slightly rounded slump of his shoulders, the spreading fingers of gray in his once black and lustrous hair. Signs of aging he would have sworn had not been there a week previous. It was almost as though his father had aged a decade in the last few days. Your great-grandfather was in the Imperial Guard, his father said at last, just like you're going to be. Then, seeing his son about to burst out a string of questions, he held his hand up for a gesture of silence. You can ask whatever you want later, Arvi. For now it's better for you to just listen. Believe me, once you've heard it, you'll know what it is that I wanted you to hear it for. Your great-grandfather was a guardsman, his father said. Of course, he didn't start out to be just one. No one does. To begin with, he was just another farmer's son like you or me, born in a world called Arcadius 5. A world not unlike this one, he would later say. A peaceful place, with lots of good land for farming, and plenty of room for a man to raise a family. And if things had just followed the natural course, that's just what your great-grandfather would have done. He would have found a wife, raised children, farmed the land, same as generations of his kin on Arcadius 5 had done before him. And in time, he would have died and been buried there, his flesh returning to the fertile earth where his soul went to join his emperor in paradise. That is what your great-grandfather thought his future held for him when he became of age at 17. Then he heard the news that he had been conscripted into the guard, and that's where everything changed. Now, 17 or not, your great-grandfather was no fool. He knew what being conscripted meant. He knew there was a heavy burden that goes with being a guardsman, a burden worse than the threat of any danger or the fear of dying alone in pain under some cold and distant sun. A burden of loss, the kind of loss that comes when a man knows he is leaving his home forever. It is a burden every guardsman carries, The burden of knowing that no matter how long he lives, he will never see his friends, his family, or even his home world again. A guardsman never returns, RV. The best he can hope for is if he survives long enough and serves his emperor well, is to be allowed to retire and settle a new world somewhere out amongst the stars. And knowing this, knowing he was leaving his world and his people for good, your great-grandfather's heart was heavy as he said farewell to his family and made ready to report for muster. Though it may have felt like his heart was breaking then, your great-grandfather was a good and pious man, wise beyond his years. He knew mankind is not alone in the darkness. He knew the Emperor is always with us, same as he knew that nothing happens in the wide galaxy without the Emperor willing it so. And if the Emperor had willed that he must leave his family and his homeworld and never see them again, then your great-grandfather knew it must serve some greater purpose. He understood what the preachers meant when they tell us that it isn't the place of man to know the ways of the Emperor. He knew it was his duty to follow the course laid out for him, no matter that he didn't understand why the course had been set. And so, trusting his life to the Emperor's kindness and grace, your great-grandfather left his homeworld to go find his destiny amongst the stars. "You see now why I thought you should hear these tales, RV," he said. "Tomorrow, just like your great-grandfather before you, you're going to have to leave your home and your kin behind, never to return. And knowing full well you may have some hard years ahead of you, before you left I wanted you to hear the tale of your great-grandfather and know that he survived. I wanted you to be able to take that tale with you, so that no matter how dark or hopeless things might seem to you at times, know that the Emperor was always with you. Trust to the Emperor, RV. Sometimes it's all we can do. Trust to the Emperor and everything will be alright." No longer able to keep the tears from flowing, his father turned away so his son could not see his eyes. While his father cried into the shadows, Lauren sat there with him, as long uncomfortable moments passed, struggling to find the right words to soothe his grief. Until deciding it was better to say something than nothing at all, he spoke and broke the silence. "I'll remember that, Pa," he said, the words coming with faltering slowness from him as he tried to choose the best way of saying it. "I'll remember every word of it, just like you said. I'll take it with me, and I'll think of it whenever things get bad. And I promise you, I'll do what you said. I'll trust to the Emperor just like you said. I promise it, Pa. And something else. I promise you don't have to worry about me doing my best when I go to war. No matter what happens, I'll always do my duty. I know you will," his father said at last as he wiped the tears from his eyes. "You're the best son a man could have. And when you're a guardsman, I know you'll make your ma and me so proud." And with that being said, guys, we've come to the end of this excerpt. 15 hours. What an emotional read. Definitely check out this story. It really puts it into perspective of what we play out on the board, what we read in these stories, what the video games showcase us. Like, these are people that have lives, have families, that are going to war, waging war for quote-unquote the Emperor, or for some High Lord, or just for honor, or who knows what other reason. But these people have lives, and it's kind of hard to think about that when you're playing the tabletop, because most of the time, obviously, we're all playing Space Marines, transhumans, super soldiers, but before that, they were just people inducted into this, dare I say, cult, and basically forced to become something more of who they were, most of the time losing themselves to this indoctrination process, this psycho indoctrination, this gene seed implantation that makes them completely somebody else, losing who they were beforehand. And as you can see here, that's not the case with guardsmen. Guardsmen go to war knowing who they are. Guardsmen go to war knowing the past they left behind, the loved ones they left behind, knowing that chances are they're not coming back, and this will be the last time they see those that they care about. So let me know your thoughts down below. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that jazz. And as always, it's been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate. And I'll be seeing you guys later. Peace.
Always used to put my freedom first, and then